The audio you're about to hear was recorded in Anchor. Learn more at anchor.fm.
Welcome back to episode 022 of the Alexander Schmid podcast. This is Homer's Iliad, Book 5, Part 2. Last time, what we were talking about was, we mentioned the maxim that when a minor character manages to injure a major character, in this instance Pandaros injuring Menelaus under the false guidance of Athena, that minor character will very quickly meet his end later on. And so we saw Pandaros in Book 5, alongside Aeneas, one of the great champions of the Trojans, fight against Diomedes, who showed his tremendous battle prowess by felling Pandaros by throwing a spear through the top of his mouth and out of the bottom of it, which Homer describes in quite some gory detail, which is something that he frequently does, while also comparing fallen boys to wilted flowers and cut down before their time. And so he both shows the beauties and the horrors of war. And so Pandaros dies in gruesome manner, and Aeneas is injured grievously, and Diomedes then has his shot at injuring Aphrodite, as he was directed to do by Athena. And something you might well ask, which the students ask often, is this: is Diomedes fighting so well because Athena is helping him? Or is Athena helping him because he fights so well? Because something you might notice while reading through the Iliad is that the gods seem to favor those people who embody the virtues they embody best. And so Odysseus is like a living representation of Athena, but so is Diomedes because of his pure competence. And so the gods, rather than simply helping and empowering the people they're with, seem to be more the universal abstraction of the human embodiment of those virtues. And so Athena doesn't make Diomedes any stronger. She just gives him the ability to see the next level target, you might say, fighting against the gods, fighting against the attitude, seeing in the bigger swathes. She's illustrating with Diomedes how a human moves from one level to the next in terms of perspective. Diomedes was a young warrior focused on killing, like a young chess player who focuses on taking moves. But now he's seeing more the general movements, more the abstract patterns that are embodied by large-scale fighting and wars. And so he has become a more effective and a more valuable fighter, and now captain level, precisely because he can see these patterns and affect the battle in a bigger way. And so Athena is to Diomedes sort of like Nike would be to Michael Phelps or to LeBron James. Nike sponsors these fine athletes because they're so good, because they have abilities which Nike wishes people to associate with the abilities of their athletes. They wish their name to be associated with the highest class of athlete, and so they are. And it makes a lot of sense that they take their name from the god of victory, from the Athenian pantheon, who constantly accompanied Athena, because wisdom is sure victory, if anything is. And we'll talk about that quite a bit during the Odyssey. And so the reason that Athena seems to favor Odysseus and Diomedes is precisely because they already embody the qualities that she embodies. She doesn't have to give them to them. It's not some sort of lukewarm, liquid idea of gods just arbitrarily choosing people and giving them gifts and making them virtuous. No, that would teach no lesson to anybody. That's not how anything works. And I think just the fact that I could come up with a modern example of sponsorship of Nike of the highest class athletes, football, basketball, baseball, which are the highest tier sports we have in terms of gross income that they produce. And so it's just indication of how universally true this seems to be, that those that we call gifted, we still use that terminology, well, it means that they're gifted by the gods, that they embody those qualities which we must associate with godliness. And so a gifted program at, say, a school would be those who are most intelligent. And a gifted athlete would be he who performs best on whatever athletic field that is. And, well, in this case, it happens to be a battlefield. And so Pandarus is dead. Aeneas is grievously injured. Aphrodite attempts to take him off the field. She's injured by Diomedes. Apollo then actually takes Aeneas off the field, heals him. He returns to the fight. We then have Sarpedon give Hector a bit of a come to manliness speech and chastises him for his former boasts, which will be a common theme throughout the Iliad, that the champions claim they boast at each other before they fight. They'll sometimes boast at each other also to call each other to arms from the same, if they're on the same side as each other, as we've seen Agamemnon attempt to do to Odysseus and to Diomedes, and as we've now seen with Sarpedon and Hector, seen that that's now common practice. And so occasionally a man will call you to who you've claimed to be in the past and claim that you are not living up to those words in the present, and essentially say that you're breaking your oath to your own character, which in a kleos culture, a glory culture, like the Achaeans and the Trojans, is a major thing to say, but I would say it would even be a major thing to say these days. We say the same sort of thing. You know, that was beneath you, or you're not living up to yourself. We have a clear notion of people not being the person that they are meant to be. And especially working in the education field, all the language is centered around that notion. And the whole idea is that you're bringing the potential into actuality of people. And every coach and teacher knows that this is not just using words. This is what we do every single day of our lives. And so, not fake. Regardless of whatever words you use. Real. Possibly the most real thing ever, because I would say that a teacher, as a profession, is simply an outgrowth of the parents. We have very specialized knowledge, which we add to the youth, and we essentially give them their final fruits, you might say, or their finishing. And in fact, being a secondary ed teacher, I consider myself finishing school. So we teach them the high arts, the things that will give color to their lives. And so, we can return to the Iliad. So, on to today. We see the Iontes, we see Odysseus, and we see Diomedes lead the charge against the Trojans. These are the guys who are absolutely the most effective men on the battlefield, particularly the Iontes. But recall, Odysseus and Diomedes, favorites of Athena, always doing great. So, Menelaus then has an encounter with Aeneas. And so Aeneas has just been injured grievously by Diomedes. And so there might be some question as to how powerful he is. What is his battle prowess? Well, it turns out that Antilochus, the son of Nestor, actually intervenes and keeps Menelaus from fighting Aeneas, which means what? Well, Antilochus is the son of Nestor. Nestor is known to be the wisest Achaean, and therefore Antilochus is obviously very intelligent. In fact, later on, when he gives some very bad news to Achilles, he's going to do something highly intelligent. In particular, he's going to hold Achilles' hands so that Achilles doesn't reach for his dagger and cut Antilochus' throat. I'll actually read that passage to you at that time because, well, it's there. I believe in Book 18. Yes, I believe it is Book 18. Well, in any case, Menelaus is about to face off against Aeneas, and Antilochus, son of Nestor, who's clearly very intelligent, intervenes. Why does he intervene, and what does that say? Well, it must say this, that it's at least widely known that Aeneas is a better fighter than Menelaus, because if Antilochus intervenes between them, that means that he is afraid that Menelaus might die, because if Menelaus might die, then the whole war effort would be for naught. And also Agamemnon might be very, very, very punishing to all the men if anything happens to Menelaus. So actually, it's slightly unclear whether Antilochus intervenes simply because Aeneas is known to have such tremendous battle prowess, or because of over-security of Menelaus. But I would suggest, since that doesn't frequently happen, and won't happen very frequently in the future battles, that this is a redemption of Aeneas' battle prowess. The fact that he can stand down an Achaean champion, and recall that Menelaus did handily defeat Paris, so this further heaps indignities upon Paris' name, because, well, Menelaus beat him. Menelaus is here being beaten by Aeneas, or at least not even fighting Aeneas, and was just defeated by Diomedes. And to add to that, Diomedes would be so defeated by Aias the Greater, and Aias the Greater so by Achilles. Do note that there was no Hector on that list. It would be hard to place exactly where his strength is, but likely he's not as strong as Diomedes, Aias the Greater, Agamemnon, Achilles. And the reason that I say this is that later on there will be a one-on-one combat with Hector that's set up between the Achaeans and the Trojans. The true one-on-one combat we want to see, and who the Achaeans hope get drawn by lots are Aias the Greater, Diomedes, and Agamemnon, suggesting that those are the three men who would most likely, in the minds of the Achaeans, who have good battle minds, good strategic minds, they must think those are the three men who could definitely beat Hector. And the list is 9 men, all very gifted fighters, so those guys must be above and beyond everybody around them, except for Achilles, who's even above and beyond them, which is incredible. So, Antilochus keeps Menelaus from engaging with Aeneas. Now, we get a second major fight. So a claim I've made throughout these lectures is this, that superficiality versus substantiality is the same, or is a major characteristic of the fight between the Trojans and the Achaeans, or that the Trojans embody superficiality just as the Achaeans embody substantiality. Well, this is also still very much a real fight, and so it has to be believable. Or rather, we understand that the Achaeans are a powerful fighting force. We don't yet understand the power of the Trojans, particularly with the example of Paris getting thrashed earlier. So, now we've seen that at least one Trojan, Aeneas, the number 2 or number 3 guy, I think really the number 3 guy on the Trojan side, Hector being 1, Sarpedon being 2, Hector and Aeneas being 3, well, he stood down an Achaean, so that shows that the Trojans at least are capable of defeating Achaean-level champions, or champion-level Achaeans, which is good for them. Now we get a major battle between Sarpedon, some call him Sarpedon, I really like that name, but I call him Sarpedon mostly, because of my crass American accent, and he is a son of Zeus, the Lycian chieftain, and the head, or the number 2 guy at Troy right now, underneath Hector. He is about to face off against an Achaean named Tlepolemus. Tlepolemus is a son, he is one of the Heracleides, one of the sons of Heracles. And so, why is he one of the sons of Heracles? Well, precisely to say that he is a powerful warrior. And so, what is he going to help us to do? Establish the credibility of the Trojan champions in battle. And so, they both throw spears. They square off and they throw spears. Both are hit. Sarpedon is hit in the thigh. That's a major hit. That's a lot of pain. Big muscle there. Tlepolemus, well, he's hit in the throat. He immediately dies. And so what does this mean? This means that Sarpedon is a major fighter, but that he's going to be out for a little while. This also gives us the opportunity to see something about Hector's character and his goal-oriented attitude, which is this. Sarpedon gets picked up by his companions and put under an oak tree. He screams out to Hector to defend him, but Hector's so full of battle fury that he continues running on. And so that's actually a pattern that will repeat in the Iliad, because after Book 8, the Achaeans are going to build a wall, and outside that wall, they're going to put spikes. And so, like Mr. West Chance mentioned in our classical conversations 002, the Achaeans are going to fortify themselves and find themselves fighting for a wall just as the Trojans have, and they'll feel a reversal of position due to the will of Zeus, indicating that conflict can turn even the best structured society upside down if it's an internal one. And so, when several Trojans in their chariots encounter the spikes that the Achaeans have dug in a pit outside of their walls, and they find themselves tangled up in there and fodder for archers and stabbing spears, Hector will leave those men there as well. And so he's far more a killer of men than he is a saver of men in this case. And so something that you will notice is that Homer has very human characters and that they certainly have flaws. He's not a perfect man, Hector, especially having done this multiple times. But he'll also show great tenderness to his soon-to-die son, whom he will indicate knowledge of. He will indicate that he has knowledge and knows, therefore, that his son will soon die, and he's still tender and loving with him and willing to take off his helmet and show a fatherly role, and kind even to his wife, though he gives her a very creepy speech about hoping that he doesn't live long enough to see her led away by an Achaean champion as a slave. Though that will be her fate, so he shows some clear-sightedness there. But he's even kind then. But he has his flaws, just as Agamemnon has his flaws, just as even Odysseus has his flaws. These men have flaws because they are made to be, well, substantial and therefore realistic. So, Hector leaves Sarpedon behind, and in fact, I only know this because a student once brought this to my attention by saying, Mr. Schmid, my favorite, when I was giving a vote, I was giving the students a choice or an opportunity to speak up and tell me who their favorite character from the Iliad was, and I had a young lady raise her hand and say Pelagon, and I said, Pelagon, who is that? Because I'd never heard of him. But he's the name of one of the Lycians who pulls the spear from Sarpedon's leg. There's another Pelagon too, perhaps even another one. But that's one of them. So if you remember that name, well, the reason I do is because of one of my students. Well, as Hector leaves Sarpedon behind, perhaps we might question whether that was a poor decision on his part, because then he goes on a killing streak. In fact, his killing streak is so powerful that Hera and Athena absolutely have to defend against it. So an entire movement of the Achaean army, a change of focus is required in order to deal with Hector. He can't simply be ignored at this time. And so Athena descends with an extended description of her ornate armor. And she has also with her the aegis, and the aegis is the aegis buckler. It is the shield of Zeus, which has the face of a gorgon, like Medusa, on it, with the snake heads. And so it represents nature and nature's ability to utterly terrify those in front of them. And so when she shakes the aegis above the Achaean army, it will shed pure terror into the Trojans, because it will be the terror they feel at seeing a larger, more dangerous animal than they are, feeling the pure threat of a superior army to her. And so Athena bears the aegis over the Achaeans. Hera then asks Zeus whether she can set Athena against Ares, effectively asking, can I allow the Achaeans to start defeating the Trojans? Zeus, of course, being the principle of order, assents, and Hera likens herself to Stentor, which is where we get the adjective stentorium, which means of good public speaking ability. And so Stentor had the voice of 50 men, and so a powerful, beautiful speaking voice like Dr. Martin Luther King would be a stentorian voice. And so this rousing of the men, this speaking like Stentor, well, it stirs strength of the men. How does it do that? Well, it unifies them by unifying their resolve, by focusing their resolve. By focusing the resolve of a people, unify them closer together, which is why the book of John begins with the Logos, and we choose what to do with the Logos. We're either Thersites and working towards disunity, or we're Odysseus and we're working towards unity and therefore strength. And so embodying the wisdom of Solomon, which is, but let our might be our law of right, for what is weak proves itself to be useless. Wisdom 2:10-11 from the Revised Standard Version. So Athena is going to go down against Ares and defeat him. How is she going to do this? Well, she's going to have to embody herself. What does that mean? She goes to find Diomedes, and Diomedes is nursing his wound, nursing the wound that he received from Pandaros before Athena came to not heal him, but rather relieve his pain for a time, indicating that motive force moving towards a goal can help you to relieve your pain, which is essentially an existentialist claim, too, that the only way to deal with the suffering of existence is to move towards some arbitrary end. But here, the gods, it's not arbitrary. And so we'll deal with that claim later. So Athena first attempts to rouse Diomedes by saying that he's not worthy of his father, and this is about the second time he's heard that. First time from Agamemnon, so you might imagine that Diomedes is getting fairly sick of being compared to his father in a negative way. But again, he's also very gracious to authority. So here he actually shows a capacity to bargain with the god, indicating, for one, his good standing with Athena, for two, her capacity as the wisdom god means that she'll actually negotiate. She'll actually talk to and reason with the humans because she represents their capacity to reason. And so, in some ways, the people whom she chooses to embody herself in by sharing her plans and wisdom with them, they have a chance to negotiate and speak with her, suggesting that perhaps wisdom is a question-answer sort of format like those who do inquiry suggest, which is there's one thing that questions, there's one thing that answers. There's an Odysseus and there's an Athena. There's a Plato and an Aristotle. There's a Socrates and there's a whatever student he has that day, Phaedrus. But so Diomedes feels free to respond to Athena, and perhaps this also indicates his blooming wisdom and his blooming competency, the fact that he is wise enough to give his reasons to her which are correct. And his reason is this. He says, "What do you mean, Athena? Why are you insulting me? The reason I'm not fighting right now is that I have the vision of the gods, but you told me, do not fight against any other gods. I see Ares out there doing damage. It's not because I'm a coward that I don't fight against him. You told me not to. Wisdom told me not to." Well, wisdom, or competency as Athena is now, she's going to join Diomedes. So what does this mean? This means that he continues to increase in competency and can now take on a larger role. And what is the role going to be? Attacking Ares. Well, Ares is going to be a far more fierce opponent than Apollo. Apollo is impossible for any human. Patroclus, Achilles, and Diomedes all know this. The most powerful Achaeans. There's no chance. However, Ares is a bit of a, just as the Trojans, he is a more superficial aspect of war, more like a violent individual. And I would say, having done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu back in Milwaukee, there were lots of people that would walk in who were of violent natures. They never lasted, because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu required intelligence, grit, determination, integrity, intangibles that were valuable. Also discipline and time and athleticism. And so the people that were often most talented were often the people who would be most talented athletes in any sport. People who were athletic and had endurance and were strong and were willing to learn and adapt. And those were the athletes. And the people who just wanted to hurt people, well, they would often end up getting hurt themselves, because if you have a desire to hurt indiscriminately, well, you're a person too, and, well, you're very close to yourself, so that's often how it goes. So, Diomedes responds that he's doing exactly as Athena said, and so Athena says, okay, let's fight Ares together, which means she'll embody herself in him. And how does she do this? Well, she pushes Sthenelus, his charioteer, out of the chariot, and then she becomes the charioteer so that Diomedes can do the fighting, so that he can throw the spear. And so she sets the motivational goal. He has to achieve it. And in fact, she'll continue to do this in the Odyssey, especially for Odysseus, even in his final challenge, as I've mentioned before. And so what happens here? We see Ares, and he's twirling his spear, and he's stripping a body as we first get him. And so we see how superficial and greedy he is, that he, even as a god, endures the indignity of stripping a body. He embodies the most ignoble aspects of war. And so even when he sees Diomedes, his eyes light up and he attempts to stab. But just like a violent tendency, he misses the mark. And so Diomedes, stabbing at Ares, being guided by Athena, competency or wisdom, hits Ares in the depth of the belly beneath the war belt. Ares then lets out a scream far larger, about, 200 times larger than a stentorian yell, which is 9 to 10,000 men. And that was a nightmare to teach about 5 years ago, when everybody was saying over 9,000 in reference to memes about Dragon Ball Z/GT. That was annoying, especially when I was an early teacher. Everything was annoying. And so Ares screams out in utter pain and returns to Olympus. And there on Olympus, he bitterly complains about Athena to Zeus. And that's a big mistake on Ares' part, because Athena is essentially the favorite daughter of Zeus. She implements his will on earth. She does exactly as he says. Most often she's extremely obedient. She's just like him in that she implements his will in the world, and even jumped out of his head, indicating that she is the will, or the conscious expression of his will in the world, because of course Athena works through humans, and so when Athena works through humans, she is the active motive force of Zeus, and so that is the principle of order in the universe working through a human when a man embodies Athena and injures Ares. And so when Ares complains, Zeus is not going to be very sympathetic to that, because Ares is the antithesis of him, and so Ares complains about Athena, and Zeus says that he hates Ares above all other gods. He actually uses the same linguistic formula, saying that above all you are most hateful to me because of warlike actions always being dear to your heart, which is precisely what Agamemnon, also embodying rightful authority and order, said to Achilles in his capacity to produce conflict. Though Achilles' capacity to produce conflict was usually applied to others, now it's being applied to the Achaeans, and well, it's showing exactly what it is that he does. Something I didn't say about Achilles earlier is that his name comes from the word "acho," which means pain or to cause pain, and so he causes pain or suffering or anguish or grief to all those around him. And yet Zeus says to Ares, recognizing that he understands his fundamental place in the cosmos, though his fundamental role is to destroy that which Zeus maintains, he says, because you are my son, I will not deign to see you suffer, because of course Ares is an immortal god and must always exist as the principle of conflict, and is even necessary to produce greater order for Zeus, which Zeus is not, of course, mentioning at this moment. And so he has Apollo in his aspect as Paion heal Ares, and a funny formula that we hear a few times of Zeus and of Ares, and I believe even of a mortal or two, I'll have to see it, is he rejoices in his own strength. Rejoicing in his own strength, Ares returned to the feasting of the gods. And so it suggests that, well, if anybody's going to endure suffering from war, it's certainly not going to be the gods. And so, even when they get injured, we can avoid feeling too much pity for them, dainty as they may seem after Aphrodite's run-in with Diomedes. All right, well, that's Book 5, and that's been our first major battle. Next time, we're going to talk about Book 6. We're going to see Hector, and we're going to see Hector return to the city of Troy and see how he avoids all those things that might draw him from his duty to his people. All those alternative duties that might, like sirens, call to him and call him away from that which is hardest to do, which is to fight a battle which he's doomed to lose. Particularly hard will be his motivation to run away with his wife and child in order to seek safety. But we'll have to discuss why he wouldn't want to do such a thing. Another, perhaps even more interesting motivation is why he never attempted to take Helen from Paris. Especially because Helen will indicate that she finds Hector much more desirable than Paris. And that makes sense because in Troy, Hector's the top of the dominance hierarchy, and as Helen is the most attractive woman in existence at that time, to be married to her is indication of the height of your status and worth. And in fact, there will be some stories in the Odyssey that perhaps she also favored Achilles, which would make perfect sense, as he's the top Achaean besides Agamemnon, which is, of course, why it's so interesting that Menelaus won Helen and not Agamemnon, and perhaps how he came to lose her in the first place, because she wasn't with the proper man. And so she settled for a much lesser man, perhaps thinking that a greater man might come to get her. And so there are also suggestions in the Odyssey when she and Menelaus are describing to Telemachus that, well, when Helen is particularly describing Odysseus to Telemachus, she describes Odysseus stealing into the city and her at one time giving him a bath, and scholars have made much of that idea, suggesting that perhaps it was more than a bath. And that would suggest that she favored Odysseus too, the competent and intelligent one, which is further evidence of the evolving Greek ideal of competency through strength and battle prowess to competency through intelligence, which is a more general application of battle prowess. One can fight more battles and more abstract battles and even defeat opponents who are much greater in size and strength through the correct application of intelligence or pragmatic wisdom, the will of Athena, which is the will of Zeus. And so, we see that the will of Zeus is implemented by intelligence in the world. So to do the intelligent thing is to do that which emboldens and strengthens the structure of one's society. And so the Achaeans will continue to embody that principle. And, well, this has been episode 21 of the Alexander Schmid podcast. And we've just concluded Book 5 of Homer's Iliad. Please share, please like, please call in, please ask questions, please support my Patreon account, and please have a wonderful day. Until next time. Welcome back to the Alexander Schmid podcast, episode 023, Homer's Iliad, Book 6. Last time we talked about Diomedes' Aristeia and his hijinks with the help of Athena on the Achaean battlefield, fighting against not only Aphrodite successfully, but Ares as well. We saw the invincibility of Apollo in the wake of Diomedes attempting to stab at him, failing, not even coming close to him. We'll see something similar too with Patroclus later on. Whenever anybody goes after Apollo, they fail even to touch him. He's beyond their grasp, you might say, as the light bringer. And so Diomedes was richly rewarded with valor on the battlefield and is becoming more and more an exceptional and integral part of the Achaean war machine. So now in Book 6 we're going to shift some. We're still going to continue seeing Diomedes and see a bizarre interaction between him and a Trojan named Glaucus, Sarpedon's second. Very bizarre episode where they'll exchange armor because of guest friendship that their grandfathers share, Bellerophon, as well as Aeneas, grandfather of Diomedes, and his son was Tydeus, of course, who was the father of Diomedes. You learn these names over time. And so that's going to happen. Also, Hector is going to receive a prophecy from his brother Helenos that he needs to return into Troy and have his mother Hecabe sacrificed to Athena if there is going to be any chance of Trojan success. And frankly speaking, that's a fairly wise prophecy, I would say, because with the Achaeans taking the field of battle, given the fact that they're stronger and better ordered and are superior in numbers to the Trojans, the only chance the Trojans have, frankly, is if Athena helps them. And in fact, they couldn't predict that Zeus would help them, as he will, because how could they possibly predict that Achilles, principle of conflict in the world, would turn against his own people and then cause and wreak havoc on them too? Well, perhaps a very thoughtful person could have seen that coming, given that that's what Achilles embodies. But, well, the hope seems to have been that he would behave himself long enough for all these Achaeans to win the war, and he almost did. The battle rages on, and so we return to the battlefield. And the first thing we see is that Menelaus does have battle prowess. He fights and catches Adrestos, a Trojan, who then begs for his life and begs to be spared and sold back to his father, which was common practice. If somebody were a noble and they were caught, it was much more worthwhile to take their armor and sell them back to their parents or to somebody else for more income than you would have gotten simply from their armor after stripping their dead body, which is a dangerous thing to do, as we've already seen one of Odysseus' companions die attempting to strip armor. So one pays for one's avarice on the battlefield. If you're wondering, how does somebody drag a body all the way back to the ships in the middle of a battle? Well, that's actually a fairly good question, because there are rocks being thrown everywhere, chariots going by, spears being thrown, and people looking to kill you and take you and your armor away. Though this does seem to be more of an Achaean practice in general, or at least we hear about it, I believe, more with the Achaeans. Though there will still be major Trojan-Achaean battles over bodies, particularly over Sarpedon's. The bodies will be piled all the way on top of. They will be piled so high that one cannot even see Patroclus' body by the end of the fight, indicating that the Trojans certainly would have liked the armor on him, and, well, the armor he's wearing at that time will be Achilles', and so that makes sense. In any case, Menelaus, he catches Adrestos, and Adrestos pleads for his life, and though Menelaus, gentle-hearted and possibly looking to make some coin, thinks about sparing Adrestos, Agamemnon comes over and shows that he's turned a little bit bitter and cruel during the events of the last few books, because what he says is, let us spare, well, in fact, let me read this to you. So, what he says is, lines 55 to 60. Dear brother, O Menelaus, are you concerned so tenderly with these people? Did you in your house get the best of treatment from the Trojans? No. Let not one of them go free of sudden death and our hands. Not the young man child that the mother carries still in her body, nor even he, but let all of Ilion's people perish, utterly blotted out and unmourned for. So, that's crazy talk. First and foremost, Agamemnon really does appeal to Menelaus' anger at Paris and says, did you get such good treatment from a Trojan in your house? Recalling to Menelaus Paris' abduction of his wife, and then says, let's not spare any of them, not even their children. And why this turn in attitude by Agamemnon? Well, seeing as Achilles is now out of the battlefield and their victory is in question, you might imagine that he's now feeling extraordinary stress and anxiety that he hadn't experienced before. He feels very much under the gun, and we recall that Diomedes mentioned this explicitly when Agamemnon attempted to dress him down, he said. Recall, Sthenelus, argue not against the great man, for it is his name which will be remembered hereafter as glorious or as crestfallen. And so, Agamemnon's well aware of what's at stake right now, and that he is in a far weaker position than he was before. And so, Menelaus pushes the man to the side, and Agamemnon stabs him in the side and fells him. Nestor, then showing his wisdom and his ability to counsel on the field of battle as well as in the assembly, then suggests that all the men stop taking the armor off of corpses. Why? So they can all fight together in a unified front, which is intelligent. And so, because of this, the Achaeans form a far more intimidating predator-like formation. They join up and form themselves into what it is that they're meant to be. And so, what does this do? Well, interestingly, immediately after the Achaeans form up like this and direct their focus towards the Trojans, the scene shifts to a Trojan one where Helenos, the prophet and weakling brother of Hector, who we'll talk about later, is potentially one of the reasons that Troy falls. Potentially like his brother Paris, he is a coward, and he is caught by Odysseus at one point, and some information is extracted from him, and it's hard to say exactly, because it's not said, just how hard Odysseus had to work to get that information. And there are whispers that Helenos was a traitor. And he certainly did give up some very valuable information to the Achaeans after he was captured that leads to the fall of Troy. Two particular pieces of information: the location or the necessity of Philoctetes, and also the necessity to collect Neoptolemus. Each task was given to Odysseus to accomplish, of course. These are the stories around the Iliad, sort of like the stories that exist around the Old and New Testament. So Helenos, this prophet, comes to see Hector, and he says, hard though it may be, we need you, brother, to go back to the city, because I've seen a prophecy indicating that our mother Hecuba needs to sacrifice, I believe, 12 robes, or her finest robe for sure, to Athena, which means she has to sacrifice something of high value that she's worked on for a long time, which means if the Trojans are going to win this fight, they needed to have trained for a long time to be strong enough in order to defeat this new threat, which they now must pray for help defeating. And so Hector has to return to Troy. And this will be the last time he's ever in Troy. And this will be our biggest glimpse into Troy and Trojan life. And less as an anthropology, we'll see this more as a study of Hector's character and the potential pitfalls that could afflict him, none of which actually will. He's going to see the three women who love him in Troy, and each one of those women will offer some temptation to him. So these are his final three temptations, you might say. And, well, he nobly and like a true hero will deny each and every one of them, though they get more and more difficult to say no to as we go. And so Hector here will show us just the sort of character he has. So the first thing he does is he does his job immediately. He goes right to find his mother and asks her to go to the temple and sacrifice precisely what she must to Aphrodite. His mother then, in an act of kindness, will offer him wine in order that he may rest. And so, what is this first temptation? Well, Hector has been working very hard. And so, wine seems like a very reasonable reward. She suggests that it will refresh him. That is a very reasonable thing for her to say to him. However, he understands actually that that's simply what she's saying in order to get him to stay for some time and to enjoy her company. The problem with him staying and enjoying her company as much as he would love to do it is that he is the commander of the forces outside the walls that are fighting for their lives against the Chians right now. He simply does not have time to do that as much as he would love to, and as much as he surely understands that this is the last time that he will see his mother. And so, he turns her down. And actually, I've jumped ahead of myself just a little bit. Before we get deeper into Troy, let's return to the battlefield, because our hero Diomedes, who's been coming up in the world, well, he encounters now a Trojan named Glaucus. And Glaucus gives us one of the most famous responses that most people who read the Iliad recall. One of the most famous quotes from the Iliad. It actually pops up twice, not only here, but also from Apollo's lips in response to a challenge from Poseidon, and to fight during the Theomachy. But Diomedes calls out, "Who are you?" ostensibly because he wants to know the name of the person he's going to kill. And Glaucus gives a long, florid reply. But in it he says, "Why ask me my name, son of Tydeus Diomedes? Because just as the generations of leaves are, so are those of man." Suggesting that it doesn't matter what his name is. He's nameless. He, like the leaves, comes and goes. And so, what's it matter? It's as if he's already accepted death. And in fact, he continues to talk on. And a lesson I often teach the students here is that what that clearly means is he's stalling for time, because he's hoping he says something eventually which keeps Diomedes from killing him. And he sure does. He recounts his family history and tells the story of Bellerophontes in the translation I teach, who's the grandfather of Glaucus, and Sarpedon. And so we see that Glaucus is related to Sarpedon. Well, very similar to the story of Theseus' son, Hippolytus. The wife of the king tried to seduce him. Her name was Antea. And she lied, saying that the reverse happened. And so Bellerophon was sent with murderous symbols, meaning words, to Lycia. Very similar also to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern from Shakespeare's Hamlet. And there he, like Heracles, was given 3 impossible tasks, which he did accomplish. To defeat the Chimera, which is a lion, goat, snake. To defeat the Solomoi and the Amazons, warrior women from Thrace. Well, this Bellerophon was so successful that he had 3 children. Laodameia, who, along with Zeus, had Sarpedon. Hippolochus, who with his wife had Glaucus. And Sarpedon, with his, and Sarpedon, therefore, is the cousin of Glaucus. Oh yeah, and I don't know why I thought of this just now, but a claim I made in the last lecture was that we never got the name of Odysseus' sister. In fact, that's wrong. I was reading with the students today in book 15 of the Odyssey. And Eumaeus, the swineherd there, makes mention of the fact that he was raised alongside. And during the story Eumaeus is telling of his upbringing, he mentions that Anticlea, the mother of Odysseus, raised him up alongside Ctimene, the sister of Odysseus. So the sister of Odysseus is named Ctimene, if you ever have a trivia night or something like that. Well, one problem is that there was this other son, who was killed by Ares Asandros, which means some sort of conflict must have killed him. And Artemis killed Laodamea, and Artemis and Apollo often bring death with silver arrows at night. Especially Artemis is the goddess of the moon, so it's a painless death. So a death by Artemis is a good death to have. But so Diomedes then sort of freaks out, gets happy, joyful. He says his father was Aeneas, father of Tydeus, and he once hosted Bellerophon. And well, because of the Xenia hospitality rules, these guys are friends. And so I think I've mentioned this before, but Xenia means guest or host in the Greek language. Also, it means stranger. And so it's the relationship between the guest and the host. The stranger, because they're both strangers, even if only one is in a strange land, because the moment a stranger is in your land becomes anomalous and therefore strange. And so the Xenia is a relationship protected by Zeus, even though Hermes is also god of travelers, which is why Zeus and Hermes are known to be good traveling partners. And you might also say that they're good traveling partners because Zeus is the principle of order, and Hermes is a god of mischief, equitable mischief, but mischief. And so he makes fun things happen. He's very similar to Athena, and I've seen the argument made before that, in fact, Hermes as a trickster figure is what morphs into Athena as a wise figure. And, well, at least the Jungians, including Jordan B. Peterson, would say these days that you have to be a fool before you can be wise. And so that, from a cultural level as well as an intellectual level, strikes me as entirely correct. And so Diomedes suggests that they exchange guest gifts now, a show of what they think of each other's value. And, well, this is a very funny part. And, in fact, Glaucus is given some flack in the catalog of ships, too, for making a foolish bargain here. And what it is that he has golden armor, trim, worth 100 cattle, a full hecatomb. It's a treasure. And he gives that away for Diomedes' podunk bronze armor, which is worth a measly 9 cattle. And so 9 cattle, probably by this time in Achaean civilization, would have sufficed as a true hecatomb because, well, that which is first given is given to the gods, as the Odyssey says. And, well, the hecatomb started as 100 cattle, but that soon became more of a heroic ideal than an actual reasonable sacrifice to make, because who could feed that many people ever, really, and sacrifice that many cattle ever without destroying his herds? So it's a heroic sacrifice. It means an incredible effort, a heroic effort, an effort beyond the pale, beyond that which could be even given in normal reality, and therefore an ideal. And so Diomedes' armor is nice, but it's worth 91 cattle fewer than Glaukos. And so the comment often made is that Glaucus gets the bad end of the stick here, but I say, no, that's not right. And in fact, the students have often said this as well, and they say this: Glaucus may have lost his golden armor, lost some status here, but what did he get to walk away with? And the answer is his life. He was lucky that Diomedes found common ground with him. And Diomedes is also showing his increasing in value and rank by literally increasing the value of that which he is wearing. So you really do dress for the job you want to have. So go Diomedes. All right, so back into Troy. And so after seeing his mother and turning down her offer for wine and company, Hector, just to go back to the sacrifice he had his mother make, he had her make a sacrifice of 12 heifers, female cows, and robes to Athena. But of course Athena's on the Achaean side, and a detail mentioned is that she turned her head. But at least she saw the sacrifice, and but she and Hera have no pity whatsoever for the Trojans. And in fact, Hera and Athena, even though there is a prophecy made by Zeus that Aeneas must not die during the Trojan War, when he is in grievous danger of being killed by Achilles later on, they will talk to Poseidon and say, we can't help you, buddy, because even if Zeus gets really mad, we can't help a Trojan. And Poseidon will essentially say that's the craziest thing he's ever heard, them having that much hate, and then we'll go fix the situation himself. He's often a situation fixer, though not at all times. But in the Odyssey, we'll see him Well, very interesting, actually. In the Odyssean story, we'll see him fixing a situation, but against old Odysseus, we'll see him instigating the situation. But sort of with reason and sort of not. His son is blinded by Odysseus, which you would think would make him mad. But on the other hand, his son is callous and hateful towards the gods, and so you might not think that would make him mad. And maybe that's the difference between being a father and a god. In any case, Hector now goes to seek out Paris at his home with Helen, because what is he doing at his home right now when there is a battle being fought outside for him and the woman he brought here? And so what he does is that he walks into his brother's house with his spear and his sandals still on, indicating he's there for business. You didn't generally walk in with a spear. It could be something like 7 to 9 feet long. I don't know about the upper dimension of that. It's a long, pointed object. It's a weapon. He's not there to hang out. What does he find Helen doing? Well, she's busying herself with her attendant ladies, spinning yarn. A common female activity at that time. It's something we'll see Penelope do. We'll see Helen do it again later. And we'll hear about even the concubines occasionally doing that sort of thing, adding to their personal value. And so, what is Paris doing, though? He's polishing his armor. Busying himself with it? What does that even mean? He hasn't been wearing armor. He's dawdling. He's a coward. He's wasting time. He refuses to leave his home. His big brother has to come get him. Hector harshly rebukes Paris and tells him to come fight in a characteristic fashion. After he does so, though, Helen, observing the alpha male, the dominant Hector, the man honestly with whom she ought to be, as the most beautiful woman, she should be with the strongest, noblest man. It makes more sense in terms of a narrative, even. And so she invites Hector to sit with her, and this is a call to Hector in multiple ways. For one, what a pleasure and an honor to sit with Helen and to talk to her. Not only for her sheer beauty and elegance, but for the tremendous wit and charisma which lie behind her eyes, lovely as they are. And so also, he's the only person whom she'll admit later who's kind to him. Or rather, he is the only person who's kind to her, who doesn't belittle her and make unkind remarks. And so, it's a call to his compassion as well, because he's essentially her only genuine friend. So there's a romantic element there, which can never be divorced from Helen, but also a genuine friendship call. And so he refuses this as well. And as Hector leaves his house, he goes then by a place that he couldn't fail to go by, which is his home, because who must he look for in the last time he ever goes to Troy? Well, that's his wife, Andromache, and his son, Astyanax. So, why is Hector's house empty? Because Andromache and Astyanax, his son, have gone to the wall to watch the battle. They're brave, and she wants her son to be brave, and to see her husband bravely acting. And so she's a political woman as well. As the princess and queen to be, she must be out there with her people, watching and guiding them, and also showing strength with the future king. Although that future is very dim and hard to grasp. And so, Hector finds Andromache, his wife, and she's with Astyanax. And a small note, and a sweet note, is that it's mentioned that he calls his son Scamandrios. And so the Scamander River, also called the Xanthos River by the gods, is the river that Troy subsists off of. It's their major water source, and it's a major running river. And in fact, there will be another river named by Helenus and his Buthrotum, land of sadness, after the fall of Troy, where he will name a river which is actually a dried up spring, Scamandros as well, indicating that his hope for a future and those people with him has has faded to a trickle. But in this case, Scamandros is a powerful river that gives hope and strength to the people, also sustenance. And so when Hector calls his son Scamandrios like Scamander, he's saying that he hopes his son will embody the same traits of supporting and helping his people through his own personal power. And he'll say just as much to his son as he wishes him goodbye, that he hopes that his son will someday be better than he is, though he knows he'll die, and which is a sentiment in the Ajax that is not repeated by Ajax for his son. He will say, before he commits suicide selfishly, leaving his brother to be exiled, his concubine to Tecmessa to become who knows what, and his new son, well, he wishes that his new son will be just as great as he is. So he is the standard as far as he's concerned, right before he kills himself, of course. And so a little backstory on Andromache, whose name itself might represent Hector, meaning man at war, or man of war. She was a princess of Theba, and you may recall that Theba was the city just sacked by Achilles, from which Briseis and Chryseis were taken. And well, the king, Eetion, he was Andromache's father. He was killed. Her brothers, too, by Achilles, it said. And then her mother died, of course, by Artemis, because her world had died. Well, Andromache gives one of the greatest guilt trips ever. She says, with my brothers gone, my father gone, my mother gone, you are now my husband, my father, my brother, my everything, essentially. That's a major guilt trip. She's gone through absolute tragedy. She doesn't want to see him die as well. And well, how does he respond to her? He says, well, Andromache, I don't want to see you enslaved ever. In fact, if I just open my little book here and find, here we are. So first let me read to you what he says to his son. And what he says to his son, I should mention, when he's first handed his son cries because he's wearing his horsehair helmet. And so he laughs and takes the helmet off, and then his son smiles at him, and he tosses him about in his arms, and he kisses him. And so this is what he says for his son in prayer to Zeus and the other immortals, 476 to 481. Zeus and you other immortals, grant that this boy who is my son may be as I am, preeminent among the Trojans, great in strength as I am, and rule strongly over Ilion. And some day let them say of him, he is better by far than his father, as he comes in from the fighting, and let him kill his enemy and bring home the blooded spoils and delight the heart of his mother. That's a beautiful thing for him to say about his son, especially because, well, he hands his son back to Andromache, and she smiles in her tears, and this is what he says to her. And notice that it's not particularly heartening, you might say. It doesn't inspire confidence, what he says here. 486 to 502. Poor Andromache, why does your heart sorrow so much for me? No man is going to hurl me to Hades unless it is fated. But as for fate, I think that no man yet has escaped it. Once it has taken its first form, neither brave man nor coward, a distinction that will later be mentioned by Achilles in Book 9. Go therefore back to our house and take up your own work, the loom and the distaff, and see to it that your handmaidens ply their work also. But the men must see to the fighting, all men who are the people of Ilion, but I beyond others. And actually, that was not the quote that I meant to read, but that quote illustrates well the beauty of Hector's soul, you might say, that the fact that he's accepted that no man escapes his fate, and so that he, as chief amongst the Trojans, should fight beyond all others for his city, while acknowledging the fact that he will die. He's just doing what he's got to do, is what he says. And so here is the sort of disheartening message that he gives to his wife. Then tall Hector of the shining helm answered her, 440 to 465. All these things are in my mind also, lady. Yet I would feel deep shame before the Trojans and the Trojan women with trailing garments, if like a coward I were to shrink aside from the fighting. And the spirit will not let me, since I have learned to be valiant and to fight always among the foremost ranks of the Trojans, winning for my own self great glory, Kleos, and for my father. For I know this thing well in my heart, and my mind knows it. There will come a day when sacred Ilion shall perish, and Priam, and the people of Priam of the strong ash spear. But it is not so much the pain to come of the Trojans that troubles me, not even of Priam the king, nor Hecuba, not the thought of my brothers, who in their numbers and valor shall drop in the dust under the hands of men who hate them. As troubles me the thought of you, when some bronze-armored Achaean leads you off, taking away your day of liberty in tears, and in Argos you must work at the loom of another and carry water from the spring of Messaeus or Hyperia, all unwilling, but strong will be the necessity upon you. And some day, seeing you shedding tears, a man will say of you, this is the wife of Hector, who was ever the bravest fighter of the Trojans, breaker of horses, in the days when they fought about Ilion. So will one speak of you, and for you it will be yet a fresh grief to be widowed of such a man who could fight off the day of your slavery. But may I be dead, and the piled earth hide me before I hear you crying and know by this that they drag you captive. So what does he say there exactly? For one, he acknowledges the fact that he knows that Troy will fall, but also what he acknowledges is that what he's fighting for is not simply the glory of Troy, but the glory of his father, but also the glory of his own name. Which means what? It doesn't matter to Hector necessarily that he's going to lose. He knows that it's tragic, but he's accepted that fate can be tragic. What now remains for him is to make a name, an immortal name for himself. And he actually explicitly mentions this in that quote, that he must do what he has to do in order to be the man that he is. And how does he indicate this? Well, the very description that some man will someday give of seeing Andromache enslaved is that she was the wife of a very brave man, indicating that how she will be known will be by the reputation of Hector, which will be sterling, which also says that he truly does pity the fact that she's going to continue to live, but to be in worse circumstance than she is now, whereas he gets to live a life of glory and never has to endure that, and in fact never will. And you might say that whichever of those fates you prefer might be the same position that you have on the death penalty versus life in prison, because one seems to be a glorious life and yet short-lived with much tragedy involved in it, whereas the other is a slightly longer, still tragic, perhaps even more tragic life, where one is still alive, but one is by no means the same person once was. And so Hector departs from his wife. He can't stay, though he has indulged her with a short conversation, but more than he gave to anybody else. And also has picked up his son, bounced him around, taken off his helmet, indicating that he's given him his focus. And for a moment, just for his son and his wife, he was willing to give up his aspect, his ferocious battle aspect, which he was afraid of losing by coming back to Troy, of losing his edge. And of course he could lose his edge by going back into Troy, seeing all the women he loves and all the things he loves there. And of course he could have been tempted to try and stay in there in a cowardly way, just like Paris, and nobody would have faulted him. But men would have died and it would have hurt his name, and so he didn't do it. He stuck to his character. He had character. And so now he has immortal life. And so Book 6 ends as Paris catches up to Hector as Hector departs. Two brothers side by side. One who fixes problems, who fights this war, who champions it, and one who causes them, who even caused this war. And so Book 7 there will be another hotly disputed single combat, winner take all. And that will be between Hector and an Achaean champion, from whom 9 will draw lots, and we'll talk about that next time. This has been the Alexander Schmid Podcast, episode 023. Thank you for listening in. Please share, please comment, and, well, we're going to keep doing this. So, have a great day.
The audio you just heard was recorded in Anchor. Learn more at anchor.fm.